Why don't you love me? Why don't you love me? Talk to you today about how I read the news. How I read the news. When I read the news. And I've been doing that. Since I was a kid. Things jump out at me now. That maybe didn't used to. I notice things. I've been and continue to be a print journalist. I do radio broadcasts. I'm very frequently on television. So I've worked in a lot of different mediums. I've done a podcast. So I have a lot of experience working with other people who are doing this and observing how other people do their jobs in the media and how they don't do their jobs. I believe that racial identity is a very, very important way for us to put a lens on and read the news. Because race is here. It's not that we're projecting it onto the page or into the news story. It's there. We're actually pulling it out. We're teasing it out. We have to have that ability to do that, to understand what's really going on when we read the news, I believe. A lot of my work focuses on race, and there is a reason why. It's because I'm black and it matters to me. And I can't afford not to see these things. Because if you drive on the road and you can't read the signs, you're going to get into an accident. You're going to get smashed. So I can't afford not to be able to read the signs. I have to. It's for my own safety. I'm going to start with a story from 2015. It's from Manitoba. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today starts with a headline, but headlines are never the whole story. Here's a headline. Mountie takes woman home from jail to pursue a personal relationship. There is a lot of research that suggests that people only read headlines of most stories. When you're looking at a news story and there's a sidebar tab that shows you other stories that you can click on, oftentimes, think about discussions you have with people. Oh, did you read about this thing? No, I saw the headline, but I didn't really read it. It happens all the time, right? So what you put in the headline is super important. What you're trying to communicate to people to get them to read more is super important. Mountie takes woman home from jail to pursue a personal relationship is quite the headline. It is communicating something that I think is important, but I think it's doing it in an irresponsible way. What strikes you when you read this, if anything? Anybody? What strikes you about this headline? Yeah.
It's about the monkey and the woman.
It is, the Mountie is the subject of the sentence. That's true. The woman has had something happen to her, but we're not sure what exactly through this headline. We're also not really sure what the Mountie did. But the thing that I have a problem with this headline is that, and headline writers love to do this instead of telling us what's going on. They like to quote somebody who's telling us what's going on instead of telling us. And I'm going to show you throughout this presentation how this is like a really big pitfall and creates really dangerous messaging sometimes. There's nothing wrong with quoting somebody, because you're telling the story through what they're saying, right? And I'm cool with that. I'm always cool with that. But what is very vaguely being described here is a sexual assault. physical assault. An assault of some kind that is gendered, right? That's the impression I'm guessing that most of you get when you look at that. Is that correct? That something inappropriate and abusive is going on between this authority figure, a Mountie, and a woman in jail. But they clumsily put in this quote. Where did it come from? Well, you have to read the story to find out. RCMP Constable Kevin Terrio took an intoxicated Aboriginal woman he had arrested out of a cell and drove her to his northern Manitoba home to, quote, pursue a personal relationship according to RCMP adjudication documents obtained by CBC. That's more clear now. Now we understand a lot better picture of what's going on. I don't blame anybody for not cramming all this into the headline, but I actually think that the first sentence that I just read to you, I think that Mountie takes intoxicated Aboriginal woman he had arrested out of cell and drives her to his home is a way better headline. Because that's what happened. And instead of giving me, when you tell me the news, someone else's take on what happened, particularly the employer's take of what their now vulnerable legally and morally employee did, instead of giving me their take of what happened, just tell me. Just tell me what happened. You told me in the first sentence. Tell me in the headline. Because if you don't tell me in the headline, I see this. And you know what? You can't pursue a relationship with somebody that you kidnap and take to your home from jail. You can't pursue a relationship with that person. That's called assault. But this makes it sound like it could be consensual. And if this is all I read, this is all I understand. And it reinforces the idea that when there is a news story about something happening that we don't really understand between a man and a woman, maybe it's consensual and there's nothing really more to see. But if I told you in the headline that he took her out of a jail cell and drove her to his house, you'd go, what the hell? You understand what I'm talking about? Does this make sense? This is what I think about when I read the news. This is what captivates my attention and makes me want to respond. Because I see this and I'm like, this is so wrong. I started reading newspapers as a very young kid. I read anything. We got the Toronto Sun in my home growing up, which I grew up just outside of Toronto in a suburb called Oshawa, and you know, nowadays and even when I was a kid, the Toronto Sun was not a well-respected newspaper by many. I mean, that's always controversial. Lots of newspapers are not well-respected by lots of groups of people, and it's about politics, but even a lot of people who like the Toronto Sun kind of admitted that it was trashy. It still is. I would read that, and I would read a very specific kind of perception about race, about gender. I'm going to add that the fact that this is a story in Manitoba. Now, the sub-headline tells us it's a gross abuse of power. Manitoba's Grand Chief says of officer who was docked 7 days pay, unfortunately. Because that's how we do things in Canada. Now you start to get the oppression, Grand Chief. Okay, so you could have put the word Indigenous in the headline. We're in a country where we're doing an inquiry into murdered missing Indigenous women and girls. You could have put that in the headline. You didn't. These are the things I think about when I look at the news, and I think about how they're influencing what we're doing. If you ever want to stop me at any point, please ask questions and please do so. I wasn't supposed to show you the other part, so the bigger. This one that I'm showing you, this is another headline. And of course, it's about way more than the headline. but we can't really stop. Or we have to stop, I should say, after the headline. Group of pathetic parasites arrested after string of gang-related robberies across the GTA. Remember what I just told you about when the headline uses somebody else's description to tell us what's going on instead of just fucking telling us? Somebody's being quoted here. Anybody in this room know who it is? No, you can't know. And if you don't understand, because we live in a culture where people use air quotes and scare quotes all the time, and you might not know what this is meant to indicate, right? So you might not really understand. And I think media literacy is a really important part of this, is that you can't always assume that your audience knows what you're talking about and knows how you use punctuation. You can help your audience by being much more clear in these instances. But somebody is being quoted saying that a group of pathetic parasites were arrested after a string of gang-related robberies across the GTA. Okay. Is there more information? There is. 16 young men have been arrested following a string of robberies around the Greater Toronto area, targeting stores and banks. We have approximately 50 robberies that have occurred starting in May 2016 by a group of what I call pathetic parasites, said Toronto Police Staff Sergeant Mike Earl at a press conference. So what we're actually seeing here, 2 stories in a row, if you're paying attention to this part of it, is media citing police officials' opinions first of a story. Their opinions. Their opinions. Police don't create truth. They have opinions and they have a job to do and they have tasks. But just running to a police officer and being like, what happened? It's not journalism. Unfortunately, in our current age, it passes for journalism. It's not. You have to tell me first, and then you can give me context by telling me what other people are saying about it. But tell me first. First thing you told me was what Staff Sergeant Mike Earl said. Well, I got bad news for you guys. Mike Earl's a racist. What do I mean? The people that he was talking about who were arrested, who he called pathetic parasites, that's them. Sometimes I want to burn down the entire media industry. Because I have to wake up in the morning, and I do this for a living, and I have to read the words pathetic parasites used to describe people who look like this, and I just want to burn the whole thing to the ground. I want to know why media organizations, I could bring up the, maybe I could just do it like this. No, I can't. But if you Googled pathetic parasites Toronto robbery, you would see that CP24, CBC, Toronto Star, Toronto Sun, everyone used the words pathetic parasites in their headline, in their headline, in their headline! Quoting Mike Earl, the racist. Who the fuck cares what Mike Earl thinks about these guys? That's not the story. Whatever you may believe about these men, who are innocent until proven guilty and have to have a trial, what Inspector Mike Earl thinks about them is not actually the story. What they did or are alleged to have done is the story. How they were apprehended, what evidence was used to indict them. Those things are relevant to the story. What Inspector Mike Earl thinks of these people is not. And he does this all the time. I didn't bring it up. I can, because we have the internet. I don't know, I don't use Safari, so I don't know how Yahoo got to be my browser. It's so gross. oh my God. Stop. The same inspector, police inspector, who gave that quote to the media. Oh look what the media are doing again. What are they doing? Lunchtime bandit robs 5 banks on Yonge Street within a month. Lunchtime bandit. Lunchtime. Look at him. Look it up. Oh, the lunchtime bandit. That boy. This is the same police inspector. Listen to the way it's written. He's clean-shaven, polite, a stickler for good grammar. And he seems to prefer cold, hard cash to cold cuts. That's the description that the suspect police are looking for. After 5 Yonge Street banks were robbed in 1 month, 4 of them during the lunch hour. We have to get this guy off the streets, hopefully before lunchtime. Staff Inspector Mike Earl, you racist, told media on Tuesday. So we are stenographers in the media industry. We are not reporters. We listen to what somebody says and we go, oh, that sounds fun. Do you think that anybody at these news conferences, when Mike Earl calls black people parasites, do you think any of the people in the media have an instinct to put their hand up and be like, why are you speaking like this? How is this furthering your investigation? Do you think this kind of commentary about members of the public is appropriate? No, they're there to get their story and keep their mouths shut. And they're actually scared, and I talk to people in my industry every day. They're actually scared that if they ask a question like the one that I just said to Mike Earl, then Mike Earl will deny their media access in the future, and then they won't be able to write good stories. So, the reason that Mike Earl and the things he has to say about the news are featured in the headlines is because these people really rely on him. They don't want to make him mad. They want to do the opposite of make him mad. So they write stories like this. You guys see where I'm coming from, don't you? I can tell. This is a bit more nuanced, but I think this matters here too. There's an incident in Toronto, well, it's in the Greater Toronto area, very close to, it's where I went to high school actually, it's Whitby, Ontario. There's an incident that actually happened almost a year ago now that we only found out about in July. A 19-year-old black young man by the name of Devontae Miller was brutally assaulted. There's a picture. I didn't scroll up immediately. It's of him with a black eye. It's not pretty, so I'm going to warn you before you look at it because I'm used to taking these images. I share these images sometimes thoughtlessly, and this is of a person who was very badly injured. So this is Devontae. I'm not going to play the video. Devontae and 2 friends were walking home one night last December in Whitby. 2 men attacked them with a steel pipe. And they beat Devontae so badly that he has lost the use of his left eye. He had bones broken in his face and his upper body. He was lying in a pool of his own blood when the police for Durham Region arrived. The 2 men who have now been charged with doing this are brothers, and one of them is a Toronto police officer. He was off duty when this occurred. This story represents perhaps the greatest cover-up of a police incident that I have ever seen in Ontario. And it is an ongoing cover-up. I won't get into it. I could, but much more attention needs to be given to this story going forward, and in something that maybe I can explain later in the Q&A or something, I was actually arrested for trying to publicize this story. I'll explain later. And trying to hold public officials accountable for this incident. But I want to talk about the news and how it's being talked about. Toronto Police Chief denies cover-up in alleged violent attack by off-duty officer. Now, I'm not going to go over the thing where they talk about somebody else's opinion about it. Now you guys are seeing that. Hopefully now you're going to think about it every time you read the news. That's not what I'm mad about, although they shouldn't do it. This is nuanced, but I have a problem with it and I want us to do better. Toronto Police Chief denies cover-up in alleged violent attack by off-duty officer. There's something about this sentence that is a little out of sync with reality in the way that it's being described. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Yeah.
How can it be an alleged violent attack?
How can it be an alleged violent attack? That's a really good question. Because look at my boy. He was attacked. He was violently attacked, and that is not up for debate. I understand and I sympathize with the problem that I am about to try and analyze for you, but we can do better. When you say by the off-duty officer, you as a media person, I know what's going through your mind, and through your editor's mind, and through your publisher's mind is liability, 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 liability. If we say the cop beat him and it hasn't gone to court, we're going to get sued. Liability, liability, liability. So this word alleged, you throw that in there, you can often just not even have to worry about the rest of it. You didn't state it as a fact, so you're safe. Let's read, though, a couple of these details here. Toronto Police Chief Mark Saunders is denying that there has been an attempt at a cover-up. Why do they quote someone saying that? Just use the damn words. After a delay in notifying the province's police watchdog of the alleged assault of a 19-year-old man by an off-duty police officer, while Mayor John Tory said he was disturbed by the case and unanswered questions remain. If we go down, if you just do a search for the word, and you look at the way that it's being used, more charges laid in case of alleged assault involving Toronto police officer. Once again, the assault part is not the alleged part, right? Down here, Toronto Police Constable Michael Terrio was charged July 18 in connection with the alleged assault of Devontae Miller. Miller was allegedly chased down. Okay, you didn't know that part, so I get it. You can't prove the chase down part. That one's fine. I don't know where else it appears here, but I pulled the next story from CBC because if you do the same thing in this CBC story, the word allegedly appears 14 times. And what my problem is that, as you mentioned, the beating is not the alleged part. The fact that the officer may have done it is the alleged part. He's alleged to have beaten Devontae. So I believe that you should stop writing it over and over and over again in a way that forces you to say alleged assault. Because the assault is not the alleged part, and when you say that, you're actually trivializing what happened to this young man. You will notice that the negative consequences of the stories that I'm sharing with you are falling heavily on Black people, on Indigenous people, women, women of color in general. Specifically Black women, there's a story coming up that we're going to talk about. This just mirrors for me what's going on in the world around you every day. It's not that the media are more biased and more racist than anyone else. Media is not. Media is actually telling us a lot about ourselves when it does things like this. Because in this particular case, it's about what would be acceptable to say about this police officer. We don't even want to appear close to accusing him of anything. Now, we don't have a problem with pathetic parasites on the other side, who are also innocent until proven guilty. But with this cop, we've got to be so careful that we use alleged 14 times. I took away my word switch. You guys get the picture. I don't need to handle this. This is how I read the news. I told you we were going to talk about a black woman. This story makes me so upset. All the stories I'm using for you in examples here, by the way, have happened within the last 2 years. I'm writing a whole book about this kind of stuff right now. These are all very recent, past couple years, these stories. And most of them are from my area. The one I showed you from Manitoba, yes. There's stuff from all across the country. Consider this when you judge Nancy L.G., her children's. The son and daughter of the longtime York Region School trustee provide their account of a painful event that has provoked both anger and pain in the community. This is one of my favorites, by which I mean one of my least favorites. I hate this story. It makes me mad. I was very involved in this story also. Who is this woman with the bandage on her? Nancy L.G. is probably 83, I believe now. She was 82 when this story was going on. Nancy L.G. was elected to the York Region District School Board. York Region is north of Toronto. Late last year, this woman in the photograph, with the bandage on her head, was at a public meeting. She was at a public meeting, and there was a black woman named Charlene Grant who was also at the public meeting with her husband. Charlene Grant went to this public meeting to learn about the school board's processes because her son was having issues at the school, and she was trying to learn, like, how do I fight for my son? How do I advocate for him? And so she went to a school board meeting. After the meeting, a member of the media approached her and was like, oh, can you tell us why you're here today, and can we interview you? What were you here to talk about? What were you here to learn? And so she says yes. This woman, Nancy L.G., walks into the corridor while Charlene Grant is giving the interview. She turns to someone near her within earshot of several people, and she says, is that the nigger parent speaking to the media again? The sentence that I just uttered to you did not appear in a single news report about this story because no one would print it. There was months of controversy about what Nancy L.G. did, and not one newspaper in the country would print the words. So what were we even talking about? Nobody knew. I was the first person in an editorial to print the words in a column that I wrote. That's what she said. She never denied that that's what she said, but she refused to step down for months. She never denied she said it. This picture with Nancy L.G., the bandage on her head, she said that she had had an injury months before, that she was concussed, and that her head injury caused her to mix up her words. But now let's get to the real story here, because we haven't even analyzed and dissected what's being said about this. Let's go back to the headline. Consider this when you judge Nancy L.G., her children say. The son and daughter of the longtime York Region School Board trustee provide their account of a painful event. This is the newspaper talking. Painful for whom? A painful event that has provoked both anger and pain in the community. I'd love it if this subheadline just read, woman who called black woman nigger refuses to apologize. Say her meddling children, but you know, I'm going to. Now I'm going to. But I want to know so many things, right? I have so many questions. Like, who cares what Nancy L.G.'s children say? You guys are a newspaper. What is this? What is this? But I want to tell you how I really read the news, because this is just the surface. This headline, consider this when you judge Nancy L.G., her children say, is not the original headline of the story. It's edited. And the Toronto Star is perhaps the worst publication that I've seen in terms of altering its online content without telling you what was there before. And sometimes you can't hide it. Look at the URL, guys. Look at the URL. What does it say? Facts to consider when judging Nancy Elgie, the original headline. You want to see it? It's here. It was tweeted out many times. Some facts to consider when judging Nancy Elgie by a Toronto Star. Steve Paikin got in a lot of trouble for tweeting this, because people were like, what are you talking about, Steve? What facts? And he actually defends himself in a tweet subsequent to this when he starts getting a lot of answers here, saying, I'm just telling you what the headline says. Don't get mad at me. Because the headline literally used to say, facts to consider when judging Nancy Elgie, and it didn't tell you that her children wrote it. Her children say. That's how I read the news, eh? Because I know what wasn't here before, and I know that this is garbage. Because you didn't tell us that the first time. You told us about facts, and you know what else you did? You let these two folks, Stuart Elgie and Allison Harrison, write about why they think their mom shouldn't be judged. Their mom. Look at the bottom of the piece. Look at the bottom of it. Look at this. What do you notice? What's going on here? Anybody tell me what they see? What is this? It may be true that Allison Harrison is a clinical neuropsychologist and a professor at Queen's University. It may be true that Stuart Elgie is a professor of environmental law at the University of Ottawa. But they're her kids. And when you wrote your original headline about facts, who's going to give us the facts about the Nancy Elgie story? I guess her kids are. And then you're going to let them sign with their credentials. Their academic credentials at the bottom of the page. Guys, this is how I read the news. Because that is telling you that these people, despite the fact that they are her children, can give you facts from their educated, high-class point of view, and that those deserve to be printed in the newspaper. When this came out, we freaked. We just lost it. And the first thing that so many people said, Charlene Grant, the black woman who this happened to, remember when you said at the beginning when I asked about the first story, and you said that the focus was interesting. No one from the Toronto Star had given Charlene Grant an opportunity to speak about how this was impacting her family until they wrote this trash, changed the headline, kept in the academic credentials, and we all freaked out, and then they said, okay, where is it? Maybe I didn't, yeah, there it is. So now we have Charlene, and she got to write an op-ed where she explained her side of what she felt was going on. I want to say to you that it's very disappointing to me that this happened afterwards. But it's disappointing that that story by her children was allowed to be written at all. There are not two sides to a story about somebody calling a black woman a nigger. There aren't. It's not a difficult challenge for us to know what that story is about. And since we like to pretend that it is, that's why we're in such trouble these days. Because we like to pretend that we don't understand what these stories are about. That maybe there was a misunderstanding. The media is participating in trivializing this pain against my community. But now you know that Charlene didn't have the chance to even write this until all of that mess was put in front of it. Wasn't even asked, how do you feel that this woman won't resign? CBC The National has been a more favorite target of mine recently for work like this. What's going on here? What do you see? Anybody want to tell me how this makes you feel or how it makes you react? The screenshot that I have taken from the Nationals player is a picture of the host, Wendy Mesley, their Sunday talk, which is a panel. And the question for the Sunday panel, is the feminism movement going too far? What's going on here? Yeah.
It implies that there's like something to be worried about or some reason why the feminist movement is doing something weird that has to be talked about.
Yes. It is implying that there is a thing, an entity called the feminist movement, and that it is going too far. Again, there's only so much you can put on a headline. But if you want to talk about feminism, this is not the way to do it. This is the way to trivialize what feminism means, or that it's important, or that it's relevant. But this is a caricature of whatever is being called feminism, in my view. That's what I see. I think that this is horrible. But this program, the National, does this on a regular basis. They had a Sunday Talks segment after Omar Khadr was awarded a settlement by the government for being tortured, for being left in Guantanamo Bay for numerous years by the Canadian government. That Sunday, the headline on this same show for their Sunday Talk panel was, does Omar Khadr deserve his $10.6 million settlement? Does Omar Khadr deserve it? Does somebody who gets tortured deserve compensation? That's what the media is asking. Forget what the conservative right-wing politicians are saying and how they're exploiting this situation. This is what your objective media is asking, is if someone who is tortured deserves to be compensated. Because that's an open question in Canada in 2017. Yeah.
Oh, going back to the headline, it's also like framing it like that you can be like a good feminist or like a bad feminist, and that presumably like she's a good feminist and like the National gets to decide like what's the criteria. Yeah.
Yes. I think that discussion about that very kind of elementary one-on-one discussion about who is a feminist and who isn't, or what is a good feminist and what's a bad one. Who speaks for the black community? Who speaks for your white community? What are you talking about, right? But you don't frame it that way when you're talking about the dominant culture, when you're talking about the dominant gender norm. You don't frame it like this. You do this to groups that are not part of the dominant that's the interview that I want to play for you, but I've got a couple more. Oh, I had my lunchtime bandit. Ah, yes. Ah, yes. This is also from this year. This is a gem. Woman demands white doctor for her son at Toronto area medical clinic. Okay. Oh, it's funny because it's awful. This actually happens all the time. I'm telling you that after this story came out, professionals in the healthcare industry started coming forward being like, this happens all the time. People say, I don't want a black doctor. I don't want an Asian doctor. I'll give you a little bit of the story. Video of a woman demanding a white doctor for her son at a walk-in clinic in Mississauga, Ontario has gone viral, sparking outrage across the country. The video, which was recorded by a witness and posted online, shows the woman repeatedly demanding to see a white doctor in a 4-minute argument with staff and patients at the clinic. I can go through the story. She's really rude and disgusting. She talks about how she believes that her son won't be able to get help if he's allowed to see what she calls a packy doctor. I'm sorry to use these kinds of words in a presentation with you guys when I use the words, but like I have to because we have to know what people are talking about. Interestingly, this particular story? Not found. That's what she said. She used those words. If you watch the video, she uses that word. But it's not in the news story. Interesting. Very interesting. And then they say racist like this, as if, again, using that terminology is like up for discussion. Like it's debatable that she's racist. If you read through this story very carefully, it may occur to you, you read through the other stories, the many stories, because this went viral all around the world, the many, many stories that were written about this, you'll notice something. And what you'll notice is that the woman's name does not appear. And you saw there in the photo, and you see more clearly, I think, in this one here, that the woman's face has been blurred out. I believe that it was CBC that originally aired this story. They had blurred out the woman's face in the video. They had blurred out her son's face in the video. CBC explained that they had done this for privacy reasons out of concern for this racist's son. This is an international story. There's very few basic things that we do in the news, like every day. And one of them is to tell you names. Because a name is central to a friggin' story. Who did it? Who's being spoken about? Who's the person? This person's name. Never reported. Not by a single media outlet. And one media outlet justifies it by saying, we're concerned about the privacy of her son. So that means that I can take my son anywhere and be racist. And you can't tell anybody because I have a minor. And what could happen to my poor son? Forget what's happening to him while his mom is a racist ass in the hospital and what he's observing and taking in. And that he's seeing people of color be hurt by his mother and shouting back at her, how could you talk to us like this? People in the waiting room of this clinic are being like, what's wrong with you? As this woman demands to see a white doctor and uses racial slurs. And her son has to see that. But heaven forbid that she be named, because some unknown thing is going to happen to her son. CTV went pretty far with this story and did something that I support. They went and knocked on this woman's door to try and talk to her. She didn't answer. And then they did real journalism. They went and talked to her neighbors. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Let's do this. This isn't the first time the woman has had a racist outburst, according to some of her former friends. Former friends, I forgot. That's good. I'm sure that they emphasize, like, make sure you say we're her former friends. Like, two women who were friends with her until a few months ago told CTV Toronto that they recognized who was in the video right away. Isn't it interesting how we're not allowed to say this? It was because of her racial slurs. She was saying a lot of racial things. I have 3 sons. They're all black, and I didn't want to have that negative person around my kids, said one former friend. Neighbors also told CTV that there have been several altercations with this woman. They said they called the police after she allegedly yelled racist slurs at children. She was calling my 3- and 5-year-old brothers the N-word, said a neighbor. Let me ask you something. How many times does a woman have to do this to us in public before you name her? 10? 30? 100? We know she did it because she's identifiable in a video, but you're still protecting her. This idea, again, of liability. Somebody's going to get mad if we name the racists, but you're the media. It's your job. I've never seen a story like this where there was so much done to make sure that the woman wasn't named. You know, guys, I don't play like that. So this is what I did. want y'all to see her racist ass face too. Because why does she get to live in anonymity while she keeps doing this to people in the community? Why? Everybody knew this, by the way. Every single person in the media knew who she was. Because the internet does its thing whenever something like this happens. And the internet goes and finds where you work, and the internet finds out where you went to school. You can't hide. The internet reads your Facebook profile before you delete it and screenshots everything. So we found out who Nikki Samuel was. But even after I published it, no one would say her name in the media. I was the person who broke that in terms of mainstream media. And it's sad. It's sad that no one else in our industry would do it, but that they would go talk to her neighbors and be like, tell me about the other times this racist woman has terrorized you. But let's not say her name, because something might happen to her son. So it's like, we don't want to protect the people in the community that we interviewed. We don't want to protect the people in that clinic who had to suffer from that horrible tirade that you saw in the video. No, no. We want to protect your son. And the way to do that is to not hold her accountable by having her have an item, which is the centerpiece of the story. I tell you, we just refuse to do our jobs in this industry on a regular basis in the name of white supremacy, in the name of upholding unfair structures that privilege people like this woman, and then put pathetic parasites on the next day's page. That's why I'm mad. This is good. We have until 3. Wonderful, 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 wonderful. So now, I see some of you had notepads. If you don't have them on you, but you have them with you, take them out. Because we're going to do a little listening exercise now. I think maybe I'll turn the lights on. Not that everything you have been doing is not a listening exercise already. Oh yeah. How else? Take notes on your phone, however you feel.
Yay.
So, I really, really love being a student of this game. I hate the game, but I love being a student of the game because it helps me learn how to play better. I do a lot of media. I get called on a lot to talk about things that are going on in my city, and I get asked to talk a lot about issues around anti-black racism across the country. I honestly get called on too much because there are far many other people besides me who can talk about this and who can offer perspectives that I cannot. That's a whole other story. In Ontario, due to the rampant issues of police brutality that you got a slice of through some of these stories, we black people have been demanding oversight of policing, better oversight, real oversight for a change. And we've had almost 30 years now of something called the Special Investigations Unit, which is called in when the police are believed to have hurt someone. So their criteria are police involvement in a death, a serious injury, and their definition of serious injury is quite narrow, or a sexual assault. Those are the criteria for calling in the Special Investigations Unit when it happens involving a police officer. In Quebec now, sadly, you have replicated this model, and you call it, anybody know?
Bureau des enquêtes indépendantes.
Yes, BEI, the Bureau des Enquêtes Indépendantes, and that's very, very similar kind of model to the Special Investigations Unit. It's supposed to be arm's length from the police. I beg to differ. 97% of special investigations units in Ontario end without police being charged. 97%. That's not oversight in my view. That's not even the beginning of oversight. We've had problems with the Special Investigations Unit. We've had problems with the internal police complaints system called the OIPRD. So if you don't have enough, let's say you get injured, but the SIU doesn't think it's a serious injury, and you want to make a complaint still against the police, then you have the OIPRD, you go to them, you file a police complaint. Much of the time when you do that, the police complaint is investigated by the police department where the police officer came from. This is what we call oversight in Ontario. And it would be funny if it didn't kill people and deny people accountability. Ontario has just announced sweeping changes to its oversight. And I'm very mad at this government, but I will acknowledge that some of what they have proposed is good. There's a lot more that needs to be done, however. And that is my message. So here I want to talk to you a little bit about messaging. Because when I talk about oversight, I try to talk about what I really want. I try not to talk so much anymore about what I don't want. We can talk all day about what we don't want and what's wrong. But I want to talk about what I want and what the objectives are. So I went into this interview that I'm about to play for you, trying to think about that. I did an okay job. I'll give myself like an 8 out of 10 on this. But that's still pretty good. I think I could have done better, and I want to point out to you the places after you listen to this interview where I could have done better. But I want you to keep in mind as you listen to this that I knew that my interviewer, who I've been on his show many times before, I knew that he was going to kind of focus on this report. Are we getting it right, Desmond? Are we going to see better accountability soon? Is there hope, essentially? So much of my media career and people asking me questions can be distilled down to, is there hope? This is a form of labor that white people ask black people to do all the time. But I knew that was coming. So what I was trying to respond by doing was saying, let's stop setting our expectations this low, and let's start talking about like what the real problems are and what we really want. That was my strategy. So my message during this interview was, we need accountability because police keep hurting us. We need oversight because police keep hurting us. That's what's happening. This is not a question of what's going to be the right system. It's not a question of what's going to be the right mechanism or tool or new regulation. The problem that we have is that the police will not stop hurting us, and they're supposed to be the ones to protect us. This is not an accident, it's not an aberration, it's how they do their jobs. That was the message I was trying to get through. You can judge how well I did it, but I want you to take notes about what you hear in the exchange now. I want you to take notes and think about the way that he's asking questions and what it sounds like he's trying to put across, and the way that I'm answering and what it sounds like I'm trying to put across, okay? I hope that this is going to be all right. Woo!
Let's get Desmond Cole in here right now, activist and freelance journalist in Toronto, sometimes known to be critical of the police, and see how he feels about it. Desmond, how are you doing today?
I'm well, John. Good evening.
Good evening to you, too. Did you have a chance to just, get a brief overview of the Safer Ontario Act?
Yeah, I mean, I think today that's what everybody's doing, right, is just kind of going over the big details because there's a lot to read, and I don't think anyone's done so yet. But I have had a chance to look at it, and...
What's your reaction?
Well, I would say that what's in the legislation that the government's proposing today around police accountability is like a lot of good things that have been being asked for a very long time. Mm-hmm. So in that regard, they're things that are not new, and they're good things, and they should have been done a long time ago. And I'm talking about things like suspending with pay police officers who are charged or who are involved in serious offenses or suspected of serious offenses, right? And we know now that that doesn't happen in Ontario. But that's not that huge of a leap forward for us because every other province in Canada can already suspend police officers for those things. We're the only ones. So that's a good thing, but it's one of those things that you see what I mean, that we could have been doing a long time ago.
I understand, I don't disagree with that. I mean, although it had been pointed out by our colleague Chris Stockwell last hour that this is really, it happens so infrequently that the criteria would be met where somebody would qualify to be suspended without pay. But nonetheless, you're right, it's on the books, and this going forward is, you know, not a great leap forward, but something that should have been done a while back.
Yeah, now what I would also say is that I think that there are other things that we can be doing that don't even seem to be on the government's radar. And I'll give you an example.
Right.
I think most people in the city of Toronto by now know who James Forcillo is. James Forcillo is the police officer who shot Demi Yateen 8 times and took his life in 2013. My concern so much is not that James Forcillo doesn't get paid, or that he does. I don't think he should be paid. He killed somebody in the public service. But my problem is that James Forcillo, 4 years after he killed Demi Yateen, going on 4.5 years now, is still a police officer. Why is James Forcillo still a police officer? Who is it in our communities who's asking that that man continue to serve the city? I don't know who it is, besides perhaps your last guest, the police association.
But hang on, Desmond, I did ask him because this tribunal would have the ability, the power to revoke an officer's license.
Yeah, and what I'm saying is that, as you point out, and as Chris Stockwell, as you say, pointed out, these are some pretty rare and infrequent cases.
Right.
John, you know that I talk about police brutality, and really, through technology the last couple of years in the city of Toronto, I don't even have to talk about it myself anymore and tell my personal story. I share videos on a weekly, if not monthly basis in this city of police brutality involving members of the public and the police. And we take those things seriously. And they should all be being dealt with, and not just the most serious things that make the news. And when you lose whole communities, the reason that you lose them is because you allow police to do these things to them, to stop them for no reason, to arrest them disproportionately, to pick on members of their family and friends to try.
Okay, but Desmond, hang on a second. I mean, you're saying you read this report. Here are some of the salient points that you're really speaking to. This newly appointed Inspector General would be established to oversee police services with the power to investigate and audit them. Are you confident that, because you know you're saying maybe the SIU wasn't doing an adequate job, or the Office of the Independent Police Review Director, or the other level, the Ontario Civilian Police Commission, but this guy now would have also powers above and beyond to investigate and audit police behavior.
Yeah, but I think what we need, none of these things are terrible ideas, John.
Right.
But I think what we need is we actually need to rethink the whole mentality of policing. I'll give you an example. We have boards, police board. That's another thing that gets addressed in the legislation. It's going to give First Nations communities in Ontario the chance to have police boards.
Right.
And there's going to be a police board for the OPP. Okay, well, let's talk about how police boards work right now. The mayor of our city, John Tory, is on our police board. And the chair of the board is Andy Pringle, who is a former John Tory strategist, staffer. And these two men are running the police service as civilians, as so-called civilians in our city. Is that oversight? That's the kind of fundamental question I have about our system. We can do things to make a little change here or there, but I want to know if we really think that if we have concerns that we want to bring to the mayor and his political friends, and this is in every municipality in Ontario, are those the right people to hold the police accountable? Is there a possibility of having a much broader idea of who's a civilian who gets to hold the police accountable, or is it always going to be other police officers and politicians?
Well, this is a good question. I can't answer that question because I don't know who the Inspector General would be or what the specific mandate would be. But if this would involve oversight of police services boards, would you be happy with that much?
Well, if we're looking at making changes to those boards, then yes. But there's over 400 municipalities in Ontario.
Well, all right. I don't know what would precipitate an investigation, or at least you know, having to respond.
Let me give you another.
They say they would audit them. I mean, an audit. I guess that does imply that they would actually be accountable to somebody's citizen complaints and what have you, and you're a citizen.
I think what I'm saying is that we have a whole bunch of mechanisms for accountability right now,
right?
And they're not working. And so what we're offering people is to tweak the mechanisms that aren't working instead of overhauling the whole thing. John, everybody has heard about the story of Defonte Miller, a 19-year-old who was beaten allegedly by a Toronto police officer named Michael Theriault.
Well, this is going into Whitby, I believe.
Correct, but he was an off-duty Toronto police officer
Right.
when he allegedly attacked this young man.
Mhm.
Everybody knows that story because it came out in July, and it actually occurred in December of 2016, so almost a year ago. The police board in Toronto has not said one official word.
Well, and there was a lot of,
official agenda item.
I understand.
And I went down to the police board for that reason, and your listeners may know I was arrested that day.
Mhm.
But what I'd like to know is, why doesn't the
Well, you were
have
arrested for disturbing the peace or something along those lines?
They actually arrested me for trespassing.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
But let me ask you here, Desmond, let me just get this in. I've got to get a few things in here. Desmond, hang on.
Go on.
Because these oversight bodies that you say are still lacking in real force and being comprehensive, they're going to get expanded mandates. And that would require the SIU to report publicly on all of its investigations. Is that a step forward?
The SIU definitely should be reporting publicly on its investigations, but that's the kind of thing, like I said off the top, that what in the hell have we been doing for the almost 30 years history of the SIU, a body that investigates police and never, ever releases a single report? John, there has never been a full SIU report released to the public in over 28 years.
But this is going to change now. I know it's frustrating, I'm sure, and a lot of people have had this grievance, but if we move forward and rectify the situation or remedy it, are you happy with that? At least that much?
I think my issue is that the whole reason we need all of this oversight is because police keep hurting people. And that if that wasn't happening so regularly, like all the stories that I relate to you and your listeners and that I share on social media and in the news on a regular basis, if we didn't have that happening so often, we wouldn't need this oversight. If we had teachers or nurses who were hurting members of the public with the frequency that the police do, John, we would never stand for it. And so oversight's great, but you only have oversight when there's a problem that has to be rectified.
Well, here's the question then. If there's a complaint, let's say you lodge a complaint going forward under the rubric of the Safer Ontario Act, would you still be confident that the new oversight is legitimate and would serve, an honest or honorable purpose? It seems like you're still questioning that.
Definitely, and that's a fair question, and I would be deeply, deeply suspicious.
So what's going to make you happy?
What's going to make me happy are complete overhauls. So, for example, like I said, we need more civilian-led oversight in our local municipalities. It shouldn't be mayors, it shouldn't be politicians, it shouldn't be provincial appointees. That would make me a lot happier. I think that when police officers harm a member of the public, they shouldn't just be talking about suspending that officer's pay, we should be talking about removing that officer from the force.
Well, listen, they got that mandate as well here, but the civilian oversight, I'm curious, Desmond, how would we arrive at that? I mean, do we vote on that because you're saying it wouldn't be a provincial appointee? Where do we find these people?
It's a really, really good question, but I don't have the answer for you today. I'm just saying we're spending all of our time on the Band-Aid when there's a gaping wound. And if people want to think about these things through with me, this is the work that I do every day. I welcome, how do we get better police oversight? Like, I want to have that conversation. I just know that when you have a mayor who's in a re-election year and the police keep hurting people in his city, but he relies on the support of the police association in order to have his mandate, he's not the right person to be sitting on police oversight. Whether I like him or not, and I don't, but whether I like his policies or not, I just don't think that that's transparency. We can set up something better that people like myself will have faith in, but we're never going to have faith in our police until they stop hurting us, John, and that's happening every day.
All right, I guess there's a little, a limit of frustration here because the recommendations came down from Appeal Court Justice Michael Tulloch earlier in this year, and the reason that he actually launched this report or the whole thing because of previous complaints. So I mean, it seems like we're going around in circles, or it's Groundhog Day.
No. Look. If we had these reforms in place, I think we would be a lot further ahead. So I'm glad that we have them now. All I'm saying here, we have to remember this too. Is it November right now?
Mm-hmm.
So when do we have a provincial election? May?
June 7th.
June?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so do you think that the provincial government of the day is going to get 129 recommendations of Justice Tulloch implemented in 7 months? Because I don't.
No, and as a matter of fact, we're not confident that they're even going to meet half of these requirements because they cost money and there ain't none. And secondly, there's going to be resistance from the police association. I believe, having just spoken to the head, they're not happy that the police officers, some of their duties will now be privatized. So I'm sure, even though the chief himself had talked about this in his transformative task force, this may meet resistance too. But
Well,
the
and
ball is in play.
I think that makes you as skeptical as me, John. I'm only expressing the same skepticism that you are because I watch politics for a living. I know how these things move. I know how things happen when governments change. And we have to be ever vigilant. This is our lives we're talking about.
Well, but the ball's in motion and we've started the conversation. Good to have one with you, Desmond, this afternoon or this evening. I appreciate it very much.
Thanks for your time, John.
Likewise. Desmond Cole, activist and freelance journalist in Toronto, and oft-times critic of the police.
That's the second time I've heard that now. I actually really like to listen to the sound of that. No. Yes, I like to listen to all the work that I do back when it's like media or like TV or radio because I find that it's sometimes really horrible to listen to yourself and to like be critical of yourself, but like it helps you get better. And so I think about things that I did, I think about things that I wish I had done better. I take notes and then I try to implement that the next time. So just basic advice for all of you who are doing media work. It's painful, but read your quotes. Listen to yourselves if you're doing something in the media, members of an organization that you're a part of. Critique it. Think about how you can do it better. Did we stay to the messages that we wanted to stay to? Right? Those kinds of things. What are your observations listening to that interview? What did you guys note? Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was like kind of patronizing towards you, and also like pretty reductionist. Like he was like, "Oh, you happy, Desmond? Like, this is good enough." Like, kind of spoke down to you in a way. I thought.
He introduced me in the beginning and the end as an oftentimes critic of the police. So yes, it seems that he wanted his audience to know who this is. You can't see my black face on the radio, but he wants to make it clear that maybe this person's not going to give this all a fair shake, even though I invited them on my show. That he has an agenda, shall I say maybe? I do. This is the thing that differentiates myself from a lot of people who do what I do, is that they won't acknowledge that they have an agenda. When they do, or else why would they go on TV and talk to everybody about it? I'm just going to be honest about what my agenda is, and I'm going to challenge you on yours. But I'm not going to pretend like I'm just here speaking the truth and hoping for the facts and all this garbage that people say. I think that your observation there is a good one. Yeah. What else did people notice listening?
I kind of felt at times like you were talking about two different things. Like he wanted to know if you were happy with the changes that were being made, and you were saying, well, like, you know, we wouldn't need to make changes if police didn't fuck with us so much. Like that's the issue, not necessarily just what happens to them afterwards, but the systemic issue that, you know, they keep hurting us. So why don't we talk about that and how can we prevent that?
And he seemed resistant. I appreciate your comments. He seemed resistant to having the conversation that I wanted to have.
Yeah.
Right? He didn't just shift and say, well, if not a police oversight review like this, then what, Desmond? And give me a charitable chance to answer. He kept, it was as if he was trying to show the audience that he was putting me back on track, and I keep getting off track, and oh, we're here to talk about the report. Are we? You know. And this is somebody who's interviewed me many times and should know what I'm about. I try to be consistent. Yeah.
Yeah, and he made it seem like he was trying to get you back on track to talk about the report, but he actually kept feeding you questions about your personal opinion about the report, which he then would like shut down when you suggested that there was more that could be done. He kept saying like, what will it take for you personally to be happy?
Yes, that's a great point. And I think that like, if I had said this report is a complete waste of time, here's what we should really be talking about as the first thing out of my mouth, I don't know if we would have had more than a 3-minute interview, because that was not what he wanted to hear. There are ways, I hope you heard in the demonstration here, that there are ways to nudge the discussion. In my politics, as somebody who is unapologetically, look, I'm not studied enough to know what political animal I am, I might be a socialist, I might be communist. If I had to sit down and take one of those tests, I'm sure to figure it out. But my ethos is that sharing is caring. And I believe that we spend most of our time in this world fighting people who are claiming ownership of something that they can't own. And that we're trying to fight for them to share something that they do not own. That's my political ethos, so whatever that's called. But with that, I feel like most discussions that are happening in the media today in this country are so far to the right of me, that the center of the conversation is so far to the right of me. And what I see in my industry is I see, even in activism, a lot of people who want to convene that, who want to accommodate that, because what is hard is trying to push it in your direction. And you can see the friction and the conflict, and you can hear in that interview the conflict that comes with trying to nudge the conversation in a decidedly different direction. But that's what I'm trying to do in these interviews. That's my goal. Yes.
I was on that, even when you did manage to like get your opinion in there was a point where he interrupted you so strongly and then told you what you were talking about and then questioned whether or not you were confident in making that claim. When you finally did get your point out there, and that was so blatant in my opinion that he was just, and just constantly throughout as well, interrupting you.
We always seem when I interview with him. That was, I appreciate you guys sitting through that, I honestly do. That was almost 12 minutes. That's one of the longer interviews he and I have ever had. That's like a lifetime on him, right? Sometimes I'll get 7 with him. And it always seems like I'm getting cut off when I talk to him. It always feels like, well, there's so much more we could say. You know how it works here. He's literally said to me in like 3 interviews, you know how we have to do things here. We'll have you back on again, right? It's really tense, and I think you can sense that. Yeah. Other comments? Yeah.
I feel like there was like the expectation for you to like have all the answers or like to be representing like I would be really surprised if he brought any other perspectives that were like critical of this report or like critical of the police. Like I feel like it was probably structured in a way where like you were supposed to serve that entire like voice, and then like I continued to push you and being like, well, are you happy with this? So it's kind of like, well, is like everyone you represent is like all people who are unhappy with cops, like I don't know, I felt like that was kind of going on.
Yeah, that's a good observation, because this happens a lot. So when I mentioned earlier that I get called to do this a lot of the time, one thing that I'm trying to do a lot more of is that when I get called to do this, I'll say no, and I'll say, here's who you should call and say that. And this person's qualified. 99% of that time, that person is a woman. Most of those times, it's a black woman, because these are the issues that I'm getting called about. It's like, why are you never asking women their opinion? And then there are times when I get asked to speak, for example, about, now I've written, to be fair, for example, a lot about pride in Toronto, about queer communities in Toronto, about how the city in its official capacities has been dealing with queer people, but particularly black queer people. But I don't identify that way. And so the other thing is that I'm often like, you need to talk to black, queer, and trans people about this and not me. I can't do this anymore. You know, because that is a problem. Is that when the media gets somebody who they feel is a representative and who they like talking to, right? Because there are a lot of women who the media don't want to talk to. And if you think that his pushback with me was bad, you should hear the way that people talk to women in my community, to genderqueer people in my community, when they are trying to have a discussion about issues. It can get like really, really toxic. So I appreciate that observation, and like, I don't think I can speak for all of these folks that I'm often being asked to speak for, but I'm not alone in this, because I think that this happens to lots of different groups of folks, a lot of different marginalized groups of folks. Other things that people wanted to bring up? Yeah.
Just going off what you were saying. Oh.
No, go ahead.
No, you're good.
I just thought that there was a relationship where he was constructing you as emotional and personally invested, so he could be legislative and national, and there's like a relationship in how he pushes you to be able to interrupt you. Like, it's actually a kind of, it's like a dialogue in the way his power is being served in that kind of stuff.
Precisely. That's a good observation. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, just going off what you were saying about how you often get pulled onto speaking maybe it's like, well, I don't want to speak for you, but potentially it's because you can like code your speech in like a certain way, and like you present in a way that's like a model minority. So like white interviewers like that, and they know that you'll present in that way. Whereas if you had someone who didn't, they would be like, oh, well, I'm not really that interested in that.
This is so important, what you just said. Because I, for example, don't have any really obvious speech impediments when I speak, because I don't speak with an accent, because I was born in this country. I can speak both official languages, because I'm a man with, you know, they do research, you know, so I'm gonna do a little aside here. My radio station that I work on in Toronto is the largest AM radio station by listenership in the country. Okay? The live broadcasting starts around 5 in the morning. So from 5 in the morning until 7 at night, there's not one woman host Monday to Friday on my radio show. On my radio. There's not one. Barb DeJulia comes on at 7 p.m. weeknights. And she's the first woman host that you will hear from the time that the radio station starts live broadcasting in the morning. And there have been apparently studies done that say that men and women prefer listening to a man's voice. Isn't that convenient? Isn't that convenient? It works for me, but it doesn't work if you're a woman who wants to get into my industry. So all these factors make it more likely that I'm going to be listening to something else, right? And so, like, I think your observation there was really, really, really important. The term model minority, by the way I understand that, I actually cannot be a model minority, even though I said the things that I just said. And that's because my understanding of that term, model minority, I think is a very important one for future research, if you don't know it already, is the way that racialized groups are played off against each other. And the way in which black people are the net losers of that game, because particularly in Canada, we are asked how come if Chinese came here, if Indians came here, if Russians and if all these other groups, Irish, they all came here and they're doing better than you. What's your problem? That's what I understand in terms of modeling. I can be a model for my perceived race, but yeah, just want to distinguish. Were there other commentaries that people wanted to make about it? Yeah?
I think at the beginning he mentioned something about like these instances happening so infrequently, as if to like imply like it's not really that important to have these conversations because it doesn't even happen that often. Like, you know, how many lives are enough for there to be you know, some changes made. Like he kind of made it seem like, you know, what's the issue? This doesn't even happen that often anyways.
Yet it's his topic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Two things about that very good observation you just made. The first one is that I am proud of the way that I replied to that. Because what I did was I said that this happens all the time, and just because it doesn't get the news doesn't mean that it's not serious. They don't take it seriously. Maybe you don't take it seriously, but we do, every single time. I was proud that I said that. The other thing is that when he says, you know, it's happening so infrequently that this would come up, there's no analysis there. There's no idea on his part that police don't have an interest in holding each other accountable. It's just, well, it almost never happens anyway. That's the process we're stuck with. There's no analysis there being like they're clearly not interested in investigating themselves. And so I think that's where it's going also. Yes.
Yeah, well, this is a story about corruption and, I mean, if you speak the truth, it can afraid people. People can be afraid of the truth, they cannot stand it. But if you speak the truth all the way, not in a short moment on the radio. That's the problem. The issue is that if you speak the truth, all the gossip and all the other stuff that happens beside are gonna melt. They're just gonna disappear. You have to speak the truth. You have to be always honest to yourself and to others.
I have
You
to
know
say,
that.
I have to say, I wish that my speaking the truth made everything else melt away. I would be the happiest
Yeah, but
person.
the media as a control, I made an article at the University of Montreal like in the days of 2004, speaking that AOL, Time Warner, they concentrate the information and do disinformation. They don't give the right information, so they guide you to a certain point, but this point is not valuable. You see 1 degree over 260 degrees. If you have a manifestation that was like peaceful, they're gonna show you somebody that breaks some windows and cars
You
and
saw it in
everything.
Quebec City recently, right? With Jaggi Singh, right?
Possibly in the time.
Oh, I hope you guys saw what happened to Jaggi Singh. There was like 400 people protesting, and they actually picked him out and arrested him, and made this huge deal about him. You know why they said that they arrested him though? Because they asked him what his name was, and he said the name of a famous hockey player, and so they arrested him for giving a false identity to the police. I'm not even joking. And so I take your point in that we have a responsibility always to speak the truth. We always have a
Yeah, but
responsibility.
sometimes it's tricky. You have to be careful.
Sorry, you had a comment over here too? Something? Go ahead.
Sorry, I was gonna say, consistently on that point, like throughout, when in the second half particularly, when we were kind of really getting grip on the conversation, and
Yes, you
getting
noticed
it
that
back.
too. It took a while.
Yeah, well, yeah, he was so resistant. When you did start to be really prominent with what you were saying, there was a point where every response he started with, I don't know. It kind of made it like he was presenting when you were getting those really good systematic injustices that were going on. His responses every time, I don't know, oh I don't know, mystifying it like this. Like, when will you be happy? Oh, you're not happy, then I don't know. Like throw my hands in the air, like this is too hard to ask me for too much. Like,
Amen.
yeah.
This is a great, great, great observation.
He said,
He did. I wrote down other things that he said so much and that I said so much. So one of the things he said a lot, I think he said it at least 3 times, was, I agree with you, or good question, right? Which is music to my ears. That won't always happen, because then I think that a few of you have been touching upon this, but he very much made this interview personal, on both sides, him and me. And there are a lot of people who are much more professional when they interview about these kinds of things, and they don't make it about like themselves. They don't make it about like, aren't we all good people though? And sometimes you don't have to feud with people on that personal level, and it makes for a much better conversation. Sometimes we can have a conversation about these things without an interrogation on them. Yes.
but to make it, to put it on a personal level makes it easier to ignore the systematic nature. Like the more that he asks you what your opinion and when you're satisfied is, it detracts from the fact that like a whole country, a whole globe is dissatisfied with what's going on.
I can see you're going to be teaching this one day. You're absolutely correct. I noted that I said, I don't have the answer for you today. When he asked me, well, what did he ask? He said, well, how do we pick board members for the police if we don't do it the way we do it now? If we get rid of the system now where they're politically appointed, how do we pick the people who are going to do police oversight? And I said, I honestly don't know the answer to that question today. This is a part of my political philosophy. Because I don't believe that just because I got invited to go on the radio, that I have the right always to say, this is what we should do, this is what we should do, this is what we should do. I want to sit down with the community and I want to have that actual conversation, like, not the way you're doing it to me right now. I want to have that conversation in the spirit of, like, we believe in it, not we're debating it. When we're done, when you're done and you're out of the frame and the debate is over, and we've decided we're doing this, yeah, then we're going to have that conversation genuinely. And we're going to put our hearts into it. But I can't do that right now, because I'm too busy trying to debate you, right? And I think that that's an important thing to do always when you're speaking on behalf of the cause, is to represent the values that you want in the way that you're answering. Meaning that if you don't think that individual pontification and decision making on these things and like shouting things from the top is the way to go, say, well, we need more talking with people. We need to have that conversation for real. We need to call people together. Don't feel you have to answer for everybody when you don't feel like you're qualified to do so. It's just honest. And honesty, no matter what you're doing in media, honesty shines through when people are themselves. That is always the best interview. Always, in my opinion, in my experience. I noted the whole like what's going to make you happy thing that he asked me. I wish that I had said a couple of things differently in this interview. I noted that it took me until 7 minutes 41 seconds into the interview to say the thing that I most desperately wanted to say. This is happening because the police keep hurting us. And I listen back now and I think that's the first thing I would say next time. Next time when I'm prepared and I'm giving myself my notes and what is my main message? My main message is the reason we need all these changes to police accountability is because the police keep hurting us. I should have said that off the top. And you might see that this is a very popular strategy and tactic, not a strategy, a tactic that people who are being interviewed will use is, now sometimes this can be done very disingenuously, and I don't recommend that, but people have an idea of the first thing that they want to say, and no matter what the first question is that they're asked, they will say, I want to just begin by saying, and then they will say that, and I should have done that in this interview, because it would have better framed what came next, and as you noted, it took me a while to really warm up to where I was trying to get him to go. And I should have just been blatant with it off the top, even if he hadn't asked me, and then go right into what his actual first question had been. Our accountability mechanisms aren't working, I said at one point. The problem is that we have accountability mechanisms, but that they don't work. That's my A1 to my A. My A is the police keep hurting us, and my A1 is the systems that are supposed to stop them from doing that don't work. Now I'm really constructing a complete narrative, a clear perspective that my listener can latch onto and say, I know where this person is coming from, I know what their values are, right? So this is how I develop key messages, by going back and reviewing and reviewing on my own work. I think like we all do when we have a difficult or contentious conversation with someone, you go back later and you say, why didn't I say this, right? If I had only thought of that quicker when I was in the moment, I would have said it. Well, you can. You can do that, and you can learn, and you can review like we're doing here, and you can learn for next time, and you can improve these things. I hope it is apparent. I've never done this particular workshop in this format before, but I hope that it is apparent how what I showed you at the beginning complements what I showed you at the end, and how knowing the approaches that the media are taking that work against me every day, that make it hard for me to get my message out because there's so much embedded bias and prejudice, that knowing that can help me plan to do better, plan to break through, plan to get the messages out in the way that I want to, rather than being like reactive to what somebody else is trying to put over. We have a few minutes left, so is there other things that you guys want to talk about? Is there other things that you want to ask? Are there things going on around here that relate to these topics that you want to speak about? Are there any announcements that people in this room all gathered here should know about? Any of that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Can I just ask about what it was like when you got that ultimatum from the Toronto Star about continuing activism or continuing journalism?
Yeah. So for those of you in the room who don't know, I was a Toronto Star columnist for about a year and a half. It was a dream come true when it happened for me. It's a paper I grew up reading. I wrote a very well-read piece for Toronto Life magazine in 2015, which really relaunched my professional career. That piece was about racist policing in the province of Ontario, to summarize. And it was very personal to me in my experiences. And that piece got all over the place, and I started getting a lot of success after that, including the Toronto Star asking me to be a columnist. So yes, I did leave the Toronto Star in April of this year, and it felt horrible. It was a really unsatisfactory end to my time there. But things were not ideal in the least, and it was really time for me to do that, and I kind of had to. I felt like I had to do that, or that I wanted badly to choose to do that, to make a few points about what's wrong with the media and how the media is treating black people. I wrote for the Star for about 8 months, starting in September of 2015, and then I was told that somebody named John Hondrick wanted to have a meeting with me. John Hondrick, at that time, was the acting publisher and chair of the board of the Torstar Corporation. I think fair to say the most powerful person in the newspaper. I had never met him, I did not know him. I was writing once a week. I want you guys to understand this thing that happened to me in the Toronto Star as primarily a labor issue. That's what it is, and I'm going to explain what I mean by that. I did not have a contract with the Toronto Star because they're not interested in signing me, ever. Nothing. I never signed a piece of paper when I started writing. I did not have a salary at the Toronto Star. I had to invoice for every single piece that I wrote like any other freelancer does. And I was treated like a freelancer. I was not a member of the union. So the Toronto Star has a union that did not protect me and was not there to fight for me. So this man, John Hondrick, says he wants to meet with me. 8 months into my job, writing once a week. We have lunch, it's very fancy. And I'm like, you know, eventually this date is going to get to the point where he tells me that he's here to say something. And he did. And the thing that he was there to say to me is that he believed that I was writing about race too often. And that I should mix it up for the sake of my readers. For the sake of my readers, not for his sake, which is what he was actually saying. Not for people like him who are deeply uncomfortable with talking about and naming white supremacy and anti-black racism. Not for their sake, for my readers' sake. We don't want them to get disconnected and detached and bored. Never mind that none of these people read your newspaper before I started writing for it. Never mind that my content is really blowing up every time it gets posted on social media. Never mind that. You are going to tell me about the readership that I am creating for you. Fascinating. Tell me more. I was mad. But then about a few weeks later, I got cut from writing every week to every other week. And I was so popular, guys. I'm not trying to brag, but I'm trying to brag. I was bringing in clicks and money and views to this website, like most columnists in this country do not do. And I have the receipts. But they didn't care about that. So, first I got cut, and I was writing every other week. And when I say that this is a labor issue, I am writing for this publication on a freelance basis twice a month. They still thought that they could control me, though, even though they never signed anything with me, even though they had no commitment with me. And so what did they do? They reprimanded me after I participated in a political protest. In April of this year, I went to a police services board meeting. The police service had promised to stop the practice of surveilling people in our city who are not suspected of a crime. We call this carding where I'm from. It's just racial profiling. Which is to say, it's just racism, because I don't like even saying racial profiling anymore. Racial profiling sounds like racism for a good reason. And there is no good reason to racially profile. So it's just racism. But our police board said that they were going to stop this activity. They did not. And all the information, personal information, We live in an information age, and what that means for me is surveillance. So when you take information from people who are not suspected of a crime and you keep it, and then when you say, well, we're not going to do that anymore, but you still hold on to all that information that you gather under suspicion of nothing, you haven't ended the practice in mind. I went to the Police Services Board to say that in April of this year, and I sat down in the chair, I gave my remarks to the police board for the 5 minutes that they allow you to do, and when it was over, they asked me to, thank you very much, you know, you can leave, and I said no. And I just sat there. And they asked me again and again, and I refused to move. So they adjourned the meeting. The politicians just got up, including the mayor of the city, and they just walked out of the meeting. 10, 15 minutes later, this is the part of the story that if you just read about it, you completely understand. 10, 15 minutes later, so remember, the politicians are now gone, meeting's adjourned. After every meeting of the Police Services Board, I go to almost every one. We mill about, we talk, the media hang out and talk. That's what everybody was doing this time too. And then 4 armed police officers came into the room to escort me out. What law was I breaking? What law was I breaking when 4 officers of the law came to take me out of that building? Who was I threatening? Nobody. If that wasn't enough though, I get a call from the Toronto Star saying after this whole thing that they want to speak to me. So I go into my editor's office and he says, well, Desmond, you've broken the rules of the newspaper. You're a columnist and you can't be a columnist and an activist at the same time. I said, oh really, where your rules said that?
Where's it written?
He had a paper printed out for me, which was the rules of the newspaper. Now remember, I never signed any contract with this organization, and they never asked me to sign one. So I had agreed to nothing. But just to be ethical and fair, and to say like, okay, well, I'm sure that there are reasonable ways that you have expected me to act, and it's fair for you to tell me that, let's just give you the benefit of the doubt. What do these rules say? These rules basically say that you can't be a commentator and a reporter, or sorry, you can't be an actor and a reporter or commentator at the same time. That's what the rules say. My interpretation of that is as follows. If I had gone to the Police Services Board meeting, done what I had done in protest, not doing my job, but just doing a Desmond protest, and then I had come back and said I want to write a feature for the Toronto Star about my protest at the Police Services Board, that would be breaking the rules. And I didn't do that. But here's where it gets fun. People at the Toronto Star have done that. They've done exactly that. There's a woman named Catherine Porter who used to write for the Star, who now writes for the New York Times. And 3 years ago, Catherine Porter went to a protest with her daughter. A protest about environmentalism. She's an environmentalist. She took her daughter to this protest. A right-wing agitator, whose name I try never to say in this country, was there. She got into a big fight with him. He recorded it. So she was participating in political protest. She gets into a fight with this dude, a verbal fight. And then she goes and she writes a column for the Toronto Star about this highly publicized verbal argument that she had with the right-wing hack. People complained because he released a video of their interaction, and a lot of the things that Catherine Porter wrote about her interaction were inaccurate. So she misrepresented a conversation. She didn't do what all of us are bound to do, which is tell the truth. So she got caught up in that. And the newspaper did say that they were disappointed about that. But people also complained, why is this activist writing about her experiences in your newspaper? You know what the Toronto Star said? They said, we know Catherine Porter is an activist, that's why we hired her. She's here to give a certain political view, and by the way, they gotta always throw in the little thing. They said, we're proud of her for making a good impression for her daughter, for modeling good behavior for her daughter. That's what they said when Catherine Porter not only engaged in political protest as a columnist, but then wrote about it in the column. But when Desmond did it, he was breaking the rules of the newspaper. This is a newspaper that has had Naomi Klein as a columnist. This is a newspaper that had a woman named Michelle Landsberg as a columnist who published literally petitions in the newspaper White women talking about environmentalism or other social justice issues, no problem. Black guy talking about white supremacy? You broke the rules. You broke the rules. I'm deeply, deeply hurt is the answer to your question. I'm deeply, deeply hurt by the way I was treated, but I had to leave. They did not fire me, and they could have. I didn't have a contract, I didn't have any security with them whatsoever. But what they chose to do is to say, well, we're not saying anything, we're just reminding you what the rules are. There's no consequence, you're not being punished in any way. And I decided to walk from that because I refuse to be put out in that way, the way that none of my colleagues are expected to be treated, and that I was treated. It was just too much, and I wanted to model that Black people who are in this field don't have to put up with that. That was really the message that I tried to send by walking away, that we are better than that, and that we don't have to take that treatment. And I did it at a time when I was at the height of my career. I think I've gone higher since, personal opinion. But I did it because I had a lot to lose, and I wanted to show people that I was willing to lose something. And when you believe in something, and you're in a position of authority, you have to be willing to lose something in order to express your values. And so few of us in industry and in life are ready to do this, but it's something that needs to be done right now. There's a woman named Leanne Simpson who I admire deeply. Leanne is a writer, an activist, and she is Indigenous. And after this whole national debacle around a cultural appropriation prize, where writers in Canada, white writers, were suggesting that there's nothing wrong with appropriating Indigenous people's culture, and that in fact there should be a prize for people who do it well. Research that one if you don't know what I'm talking about. But after that happened,
I prefer not to be in your video. Likewise. I prefer not to be recorded.
okay. Thank you. So after that went down, one of the people who had been really cheerleading this conversation about cultural appropriation prize is named Jonathan Kay. He used to be the editor-in-chief of Walrus Magazine, and Leanne Simpson had written a lot for Walrus Magazine. So when Jonathan Kay was unapologetic about his role in advancing this very racist idea against Indigenous people, Leanne Simpson publicly wrote a letter saying, Walrus Magazine, please take down everything I've ever written for you from your website, and I'm giving you the money back. And that happened a week after I left the Toronto Star. Those of us who are in those positions in media, who identify with our race, who identify with our religion, who identify with a cultural tradition, and who are fighting so hard in this sphere, we have to do that sometimes. We have to say, I refuse to benefit from this. To stand up. To make way for other people so that when they have to deal with these institutions, that it maybe is a little bit better. And the Toronto Star never thought I was going to be. They went scrambling after I did that. Right? And I really exposed them a little bit by doing that. But I had to. And it's unfortunate, but that was what happened. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
It's a two-part question. I was wondering, we've been talking about news media, and it seems like you're talking particularly about newspapers and newspaper companies and a sort of like institution-based form of news sharing.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder to what extent you think that social media is a part of this like news media ecosystem. I kind of like love and hate that word, but it's sort of helpful. So I wonder if you think like how useful is social media in sharing information and sharing news stories, and what does that mean then for like political activism and movements? Like how legitimate is social media? Yeah.
As legitimate as we want.
Right.
How legitimate is Fox News? We're laughing, but they have the highest viewership in the country. How legitimate are they? It really is not up to me. It's up to their viewers.
Yeah.
And so, like, I believe that social media is a great tool for all of us, and I use it a lot. I particularly use Twitter, because as a journalist, Twitter is the thing, if you're in our field, right? And I like it. I maybe like it too much, but I have a good time with Twitter. But Twitter has helped me a lot. It has helped me to bypass all of this nonsense, right? So that's a good thing. However, Twitter and all of the social media platforms are, they are again mirroring back to us the bigger problems that we have in our society. So for example, Twitter will kick off this or that person for posting something that they felt was inappropriate or offensive. And they make very big examples sometimes of certain people. But if you make rape threats, for example, on Twitter, they don't take that very seriously. And we see how often people who are using social media as a tool to attack women, to attack trans people, and to like misgender people, and to like attack their identity, like we see how the medium itself, that is not really invested in doing anything about that. So I think that we can't idealize it too much, but I think we can go beyond it too. We can build our own whole platforms. Amy Goodman was just in Toronto recently, and she built Democracy Now! With a team of people, and it's now running for more than a couple of decades, providing real independent news. Amy Goodman got arrested at Standing Rock for filming the police storming Indigenous people and sticking dogs on them. She just filmed it, and she got arrested and charged. Now the charges have since been dropped, with a lot of activism and a lot of time and energy. But she created a whole new platform. She didn't just rely on what was there. Now they didn't have social media back then, but I think that we should use it, and we should go beyond it. And that is podcasting, that is making our own news sites. There will never, ever, ever be a lack of interest in local news. Local news is actually the reason why most of us read the news. Weather is local news, by the way. Traffic is local news. If you can't get somewhere in your community, that's local news. If it's too cold to go outside, that's local news too, including all the other newsy things that we consider as news. So there's never going to be a lack of appetite for that. But guess what's happening as mainstream media and legacy media runs out of gas? They're getting really not interested in providing local news anymore. And that's the first thing that gets cut. We can fill that void. We can absolutely fill that void, and there's money to be made doing it also. So, yes to social media, yes to using those platforms. They are deeply flawed and have the same problems in terms of their institutional and systemic bias that the rest of the society has at large, but we can go beyond. Yeah.
Okay. So I often like work in like trans activism, and one thing I see a lot is like organize a protest, organize a march, people show up, media show up, we send press release, we get like news coverage for one day, 2 if we're lucky. But how do we like get media to write about us for a longer time? So like we want to write about like, you know, the Minister of Justice is doing something, she provides a thing and she's not doing anything about it. It's not a protest, it's interest media usually. Or do I get like a columnist to write about it? Or do you know, do you sustain that engagement when there's not like a big dramatic action? Or do you know, make those?
That's an excellent question. And I think the answer is that you have to build relationships with people in the news media. We love it when people come to us with something that we can use. We're lazy. We want the stories to come easily. And laziness and sloppiness is a really good way to explain a lot of the things that I was shown. That people don't care, that in the case of racialized people being harmed, there isn't a lot of attention to detail or concern about how this is going to impact somebody, right? That's because the media sit back and they hope that the story will find them. But that also explains what I was saying about police, and why police are so good at getting what they say in headlines. Because they go to the media, they approach them. So we have to approach them, and we have to build relationships the way that they do. Meaning that you feed columnist story ideas. You come to them with an idea, you come to them with people that they can talk to, with phone numbers, and you say, our group is doing work on this. What do you think? And you do it over and over and over, and you will eventually create those relationships, and you will know who is most likely to write about certain things. You also have to track the people that you hope will do this work for you. You have to see, what are they interested in? What gets them angry? If I'm noticing that they're writing about the same things, like what are those things? What angles do they often seem to be taking? You study them so that you know like who's more likely. So for example, if I think of an issue right now in Southern Ontario that has to do with migrant workers, and we have thousands of migrant workers in this country, I can think already of like the first two people in my mind in the GTA who write about those things and who I would call. Because I've been reading their work for years. And anything that happens around that, I'm like, Nicholas, first person I'm gonna call, right? So you have to cultivate that, and you have to tailor it to them. They like it even when the big, huge blow-up thing is not happening, because they still have to file. It's a job, right? They still have to produce content. You helping them produce their content by being accurate, doing all your homework before you go to them. They'll be like, oh, because you teach them. We get and I think to the earlier points about how my friend on the radio was talking to me, we get the luxury when we are the reporter, when we are the inquisitor, of sounding like we know exactly what we're talking about. Unquestioningly knowing what we're talking about. We don't. We need to be taught. We need to be educated as journalists. So you do that part, and I guarantee you, when you bring new and interesting things to people and you're consistent about it and you're following up, they will. I assure you they will. And then you take their number, you get their Twitter, you follow them on Twitter. We are so vain, we'd be like sitting there like, ooh. Like, we will. We like attention. So give us love and give us attention. I know we're now like about 10 minutes over. People have to start getting going on that. But there's a couple more things that you want to say. Go ahead.
I wanted to ask, sometimes it feels like that if you want to make a change, there's like two options. You can either go like through the system or you can go against the system.
Yeah.
I want to ask if you feel like you ever, although like social media definitely has given like a way to get your voice out without having to succumb, I guess, or please with institutions like the newspaper and that. Do you feel that sometimes in order to continue to get on radio stations, to continue to be listened to, that there's a line that you have to like thread between working with the system and fighting against it?
Yes, and brilliant question, and I reject the dichotomy. I don't agree with people who say you have to pay.
But in order to like be heard, in order to not be shut down as an angry black person, in order not to be...
I'm going to be no matter what.
Yeah.
I'm going to be. Or I won't be angry and then I'm not a human. So I can be the happy black person, right? We all know about this magical Negro narrative that's out there. I could be that person, but that's not a real human being. So I choose to be me, and with a sense of courage, I choose to do what I was mentioning before, which is always to be pushing the existing boundary more into my side, as every time I go out. That is not for everyone. It is not for everyone. Not everybody can. Not everybody wants to. There are huge risks associated. There is losing your column in the Toronto Star associated. You will pay. Are you willing to pay the price? I am. So I do it. But sometimes there are other people who think to themselves, I'm going to get in there and I'm going to be real quiet. That is an approach. I think that even if you have that approach, you have to be careful not to give too much back to the system that you're trying so hard to fit into. And it's a dance, it's a very delicate dance. But I support people who are in the institution. Look, if I could abolish policing tomorrow and replace it with something that actually kept people safe, that's what I would do. But for now, if I didn't know people who are police officers, people call me anti-police like it's a personal thing. It's not personal. I'm anti-violence. And y'all are the violent ones. But I have contacts within police teach me this effery from the inside. You mean? Like, I rely on that. And I don't say that they're all sellouts and they're all, that would be too easy. That would be too easy. Some of them are. Some of them are. The police chief of the city of Toronto, Mark Saunders, no. Okay? He went too far in the other direction. He's gone too far in the, if we cooperate within their system, we will get results thing. And now he just loves the police state. So that can happen. But there are ways to operate within it with integrity as well, I believe. We need them all. We need them all, and we need solidarity. And I think this is going to be the last thing that I say. But I am inspired, my work is heavily inspired by the activism of Black Lives Matter Toronto over the last 3 years. And it's been now 3 years since Black Lives Matter Toronto held their first event. And they have started a revolution in my city, and they've started something very serious across this country. They have reignited, let me say, something that our parents and grandparents and our ancestors have been doing for hundreds of years. They've renewed it, if you ask me. And I'm deeply inspired by what they do and how hard they push. And when I see them out there willing to lay themselves down on the line, I feel like I gotta do the same thing. But the reason I'm saying that is, I'm talking for 2 hours and I forgot the last point. I was saying
We're gonna end on it.
Solidarity.
solidarity, that word.
Yeah.
Thank you. What I don't understand, I understand why people think that Black Lives Matter as groups, because none of them are, look, you can't apply for your Black Lives Matter membership, okay? These are people in communities who are against violence, who are against suffering, who love peace, who love justice, who love equity, and they've decided to take it into their own hands. There's no licensing, there's no franchise. Okay? It's an idea. It's a good idea. Some people don't like the tactics, and that's all we ever seem to talk about. Should they have stayed for 2 weeks outside the police station? Should they have gone to the premier's house and laid something at her front door? Should they have said this word instead of that word? Should they have called the prime minister this or that? Should they have tweeted this or that? Always moralizing and never talking about the issue. So I believe in solidarity. I believe that Black people who are inside institutions have to have solidarity with people who are on the street, whether they would do it themselves like that or not. Because they're out here fighting for you. When we get the kind of police oversight reforms that are proposed in that interview that you heard me doing, we get them for every Ontario. We fight as Black people if we put Black on the front of it and we let everybody know, yeah, we are proud to be Black. But when we win, everybody gets the improvement. So solidarity is like necessary, and that's all I want to end on with you guys, is to say that if you don't choose to be one of the really, really like hardcore disruptive people, that's fine. But you're going to be in circles all the time where people are trying to discredit us, where people are trying to discredit us who are willing to go that extra, and you have to tell them, no, I support these folks, even if I'm not out there, I support. That's what solidarity means to me, and like it's deeply, deeply important. However you choose to like attack this stuff. I'm gonna end there. I want to thank Hubert very, very, very much for this. Thank you so, so much for the organizing that you've done. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the week. That's it.